Professor Ethra entered the lecture hall under full bio-containment protocol, goggles sealed, filtration, mask humming, gloves layered in triple polymers. Behind him, a levitating containment tray glided silently, its contents hidden beneath a shimmering stasis field marked with hazard symbols in 9 languages. The students fell silent. "Today," Ethra said gravely, "you will witness why Terran flora remains the most dangerous category of xenobotanical study in the known galaxy." A few students shifted nervously. One of the Anarians, covered in translucent scale plating, raised a protective hood over his secondary eyes. Even the usually fearless Pruln twins lowered their snack pouches, antennae twitching with unease. Josh leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyebrows creeping upward. The tray settled onto the central podium. With a flick of Ethra's wrist, the field peeled back in stages, revealing 6 small plants. To the untrained eye, they looked absurdly innocent tiny shrubs, bright berries, a few shriveled pods like something from a kitchen spice rack. Ethra pointed to a wrinkled red specimen. This one dissolved the lining of a containment drone in under 6 seconds. The next triggered neural seizure in a Class 4 carnivore. This, he paused dramatically, is Capsicum chinense, known to our lab teams as searing death bloom. A low ripple of gasps echoed through the room. Josh blinked. He leaned forward, squinting at the plant. "Hold up," he said. "That's a Carolina Reaper." Ethra turned slowly, his expression unreadable behind the mask. "A what?" Josh gave a lopsided shrug. "Yeah, we call that seasoning. You could have dropped a gravbot from the ceiling, and it wouldn't have made a sound louder than the silence that followed." Students stared at him as if he had just said he bathed in acid for leisure. The Grolan student in row 3 clutched his chest sacs and whimpered. A Lutrasi female quietly slid her protective mask on, despite being 3 rows away. Professor Ethra's mask hissed slightly as he stepped away from the tray. "Mr. Joshua, I suggest you refrain from humor in this forum. That pod contains concentrated capsaicinoids. 1 microliter of vapor caused full system organ failure in a Xerian slug beast." Josh rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, that tracks. My cousin once made a hot wing marinade with Reaper sauce, and he had to get his stomach pumped. But he also drank beer and ate 15 of them, so that's kinda on him." Ethra looked genuinely rattled now. "You ingest this compound? Voluntarily?" Josh nodded. "Yeah, it's like a challenge. People record themselves eating them. There's a whole subculture. Some guy cried for 20 minutes and got 1 million views." A Pruln student dropped their stylus. "Is it a ritual of endurance?" "It's more for kicks," Josh said. "Spice heads, we call them. Some do it for adrenaline, or because they lost a bet." Ethra stared. "You gamble with internal combustion?" Josh blinked. "I mean, not actual combustion, just mouth pain. For a while. Then, a bit of stomach regret. Sometimes, hallucinations, if you're dumb enough to rub your eyes after. But we've got milk, so." A strangled whimper emerged from the Grolan again. "They weaponize flavor." "I assure you," Ethra said with professional dread, "this is not a flavor. This is a biochemical hazard." Josh stood, walking toward the podium. Ethra stepped back. "Stop." But Josh was already tapping the containment tablet mounted on the side of the levitating tray. The security screen flared red. "Access denied. Biohazard class sickened." Josh tilted his head, smirked a little, which made 3 alien students recoil, as if he had drawn a blade and pressed his thumb against the override sensor. "Bioauthentication accepted. Human immunity profile detected. Proceed with caution." The clamp disengaged with a soft hum. Professor Ethra staggered back, visibly shaking. "You are not cleared for contact. This is reckless. This is madness." Josh reached in and plucked a Carolina Reaper pod from its place with the same casualness someone might grab a pretzel. He gave it a sniff and winced. "Still fresh." Ethra hit the med alert panel with his elbow. Alarms screamed to life. Warning lights pulsed red. A containment field slammed down around the podium too late. Josh popped the pepper into his mouth. And chewed. 5 seconds passed. Then the auditorium exploded into chaos. A Xerian student fainted outright. The Pruln twins screamed in unison and crawled under their desk. One of the Anarians began praying to a gelatinous deity. Josh, meanwhile, had gone an alarming shade of red. His eyes watered instantly. His breath hitched. "Oh, wow," he gasped. "Yeah, that's got heat." He hiccuped. Then again. He bent slightly at the waist. His breathing turned shallow. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His pupils dilated like he'd been dropped into Arctic water. His mouth hung open in visible agony. "Do you guys have yogurt? Milk? Anything?" Ethra didn't respond. He was attempting to call in orbital support. The med team arrived 90 seconds later. 4 armored responders burst into the room, dragging emergency hydration tanks, a stretcher, and a portable isolation tent. 2 students were crying. One was quietly vomiting into their notebook. Josh was now sitting on the floor, wheezing. His lips were visibly blistering. His hands trembled. "Okay, I admit it. That one hit harder than I remember." The lead medic scanned him. Core temp rising, blood pressure critical, heart rate 186 and climbing. "Is he dying?" a student cried. "He's metabolizing," the medic said grimly. "Badly." "Sir," said another, "he's going into tachycardia. We need to flush the capsaicin." A cold saline mist was sprayed into Josh's mouth as they eased him into the stretcher. His speech slurred. "Why'd I do that? That was dumb." Ethra stood frozen as the isolation dome sealed around the Terran and floated out. Behind him, his carefully curated tray of death plants still hovered -1 Reaper. No one dared approach it. No one said a word. The Grolin broke the silence with a whisper. "They feed on suffering." The medbay smelled faintly of antiseptic foam and panic. Not Josh's panic, he was barely conscious for the first 4 hours, but institutional panic, the kind that comes from treating something no one understands. "Neurological signals are spiking again. Seizure protocol standby," muttered a nurse as she read his vitals. "Not seizure," Dr. Resch said. He was a stout Glathian with 4 arms and an empathy implant wired directly to his cortex. "He's dreaming about food." "You're sure?" Dr. Resch nodded solemnly, adjusting the transcranial monitor. "There's rhythmic chewing patterns in the delta waves, and is that hold on he's remembering something called Hot Ones, with a host named Sean? Sean?" The nurse frowned. "Why does that sound like a gladiator show?" Resch sighed. "For them, it kind of is." Josh stirred. His mouth was covered in a protective gel layer, blisters visible underneath. An IV line dripped electrolytes into his arm, while a cooling collar pulsed soft relief into his neck. A nausea suppression patch had been applied just below his jaw. He looked every bit like someone recovering from a near-fatal encounter. Because he was. Capsaicin, it turned out, in those quantities raw, undiluted, and without any preparation, acted like a localized chemical burn, combined with a short-term cardiac stimulant. His heart had stabilized after several hours, but his digestive tract was still a mess. "Can I get pudding?" Josh croaked. Resch leaned over. "Only if you agree not to smuggle more seasonings out of lecture halls." Josh gave a weak thumbs up and groaned. "You guys really need to label that better. I didn't see anything about spice levels." There was a level 3 biohazard symbol. "Right, but in Earth terms, that's more like a warning. Fun ahead." Resch blinked all 4 of his eyes. "How are any of you still alive?" Josh didn't have the energy to answer that, but later that evening, once he could swallow without choking on his own tongue, he gave the med staff their first full explanation. "Okay, so, on Earth we rate spicy stuff using something called Scoville units," he said, sitting propped up on a pile of fiber pillows. "It's basically how many parts of sugar water you need to dilute the capsaicin until people stop tasting the heat." One of the assistants, a work with tendrils that curled when confused, asked, "So the pepper you ate, what was it, Scoville?" Josh winced, just remembering it. Carolina Reaper clocks in at about 2.2 million. The tendrils went limp. "For reference," Josh continued, "a jalapeno's like 5,000. Dr. Resch dropped his datapad. "You consume something 400 times hotter than a low-level Terran pepper, in its raw form, without a stabilizing agent." Josh gave him a thumbs up again, this time with a touch of sarcastic pride. "Spice head since high school. I trained on ghost pepper, jerky, and dares from my cousins. And we used to have a club where we tried to outdo each other with hot sauces. My friend Tyler once cried for an hour after trying something called Satan's elbow. I tapped out at Hell Extract #9. Resh just stared. That's not culinary behavior, that's masochism. I mean, Josh admitted, sometimes you just want to feel something on a Tuesday. Word of his recovery and the medical reports spread fast. By the next morning, Josh's room had become something of a pilgrimage site. An Orith student knocked gently on the doorframe. Is it true you burned your tongue on purpose? Josh, sipping from a hydration pack, gave a half smile. Wasn't trying to burn it. That just sort of happens. The student bowed solemnly and left behind a gift, a drawing of a Terran surrounded by flames, wrestling a pepper shaped like a dragon. Someone else brought a small sculpture of a pepper placed inside a shrine arch. Is this a shrine? Josh asked. The prune standing nearby nodded reverently. We call it the Forge of Taste. By day 3, he was mostly upright again, though still on a restricted diet. The medical team insisted on soft food, neutral pH, and minimal spice. Even a whiff of pickled kimchi from the cultural cafeteria wing gave him a moment of heartburn. Professor Ethra, against his better judgment, arrived that afternoon. He stood just inside the doorway, arms folded behind his back, wearing his usual lecture robes minus the containment gear. Josh looked up from his nutrient pudding. Well, if it isn't the Doom Gardener himself. Ethra ignored the jab. You realize you endangered everyone in that hall. Yeah, not my best moment, Josh admitted. Wasn't trying to prove anything. I just didn't think you guys would freak out over a chili. You bypassed a level 3 safety protocol. I used the override, bio-authenticated, the tablet, let me. That override was only installed for human-specific lab staff working with flora for research, not for gastronomic heroism. Josh winced. Fair, but also? You really should cross-reference your threat lists with cultural use cases. Not everything that hurts is lethal. Sometimes it's just Tuesday. Ethra paced, his expression tight. We lost a drone. We had a technician develop acute lung scarring after opening a dried ghost pepper sample without breathing gear. Your biology is more heat-resistant than most species. You metabolize capsaicin as pain, not as chemical assault. Josh shrugged. We evolved on a death planet. Everything's trying to kill us, and we kind of leaned into it. Some of us started putting it on nachos. Ethra pinched the bridge of his nose. You're telling me this entire category of weaponized flora is cuisine? In moderation. You don't see me putting a Reaper on toast every morning. That was a bad idea, even by dumb human standards. Ethra looked down at him. And yet you did it. Josh gave a sheepish smile. Yeah, that one's on me. The professor studied him a moment longer, then turned to leave. Just before stepping out, he added, I'm revising my lecture series. Next week's seminar will include a segment titled Pain is Palate, a Terran Compulsion. Josh laughed, then clutched his side. Ow. Okay. Don't make me laugh yet. By the following day, rumors of the incident had made it into the Institute's unofficial meme archive. Posters appeared across campus showing Josh in a heroic pose, mid-hiccup, flames behind him, with captions like, Taste the pain, and He dined with death, and asked for seconds. A few curious students requested microdose trials from the medbay staff. The first, a Nilari with 4 taste lobes, dipped the tip of a feeding appendage into a 1-molecule thick smear of ghost pepper extract diluted in glucose gel. He began chanting in what sounded like a dead dialect. When revived, he whispered, I saw my ancestors. They were weeping. The second, more daring, attempted a full drop on the tongue. She declared it a spiritual awakening before lying down on the cool floor tiles and asking if the walls were supposed to pulse like that. Medical staff banned unsupervised spice trials within the hour. Ethra submitted a new recommendation to the Board of Hazard Classification, a small red triangle with a flame icon, to be added next to radioactive and corrosive symbols on plant samples from Earth. The new symbol would read, Caution, Terran Spice, Sensory Aggravator 2. It was quietly approved. Josh, finally cleared for discharge by late evening, stepped back into the main hall, blinking at the overhead lights. His tongue still felt like it had fought a small war, but he was alive, hydrated, and judging by the nods from passing students, a bit of a celebrity. Someone handed him a wrapped box. He opened it to find a cube of something dark, dense, and faintly steaming. A note was attached. Experimental culinary fusion, Inferno Cube 1, Terran inspired. Proceed with caution. Josh sniffed it. His nose hairs curled. He smiled anyway. Professor Ethra stared at his lecture console as if it had personally betrayed him. On the left, his original syllabus. Week 7, Terran Biohazards, Flora. Subtopics included toxic alkaloids, unpredictable pollen phenomena, and seed-based explosives, case study coconut. It was a meticulously constructed curriculum built on caution, verified fatalities, and deep respect for evolutionary madness. On the right, the new revised version awaiting board approval. Week 7, Terran Biohazards, Flora and Flavor. With subtopics now amended to include capsaicin and the pain-pleasure nexus, neurological justifications for recreational suffering, and, regrettably, common Terran foods that may hospitalize non-Terrans. He sighed and tapped submit. Across campus, the aftermath of the Reaper incident, as it was now widely known, had begun to settle into institutional lore. The meme wall had expanded to include student-drawn renditions of chili peppers wielding weapons, one with a caption that read, Capsicum chinense, the only plant that fights back. Meanwhile, Ethra found himself fielding questions he had never anticipated in all his decades of xenobotanical instruction. At the end of a Monday seminar, a Rithari student raised a tentacle. Professor, is it true that some Terrans selectively breed peppers to increase their lethality? Ethra paused, exhausted. It is more complicated than that. But yes, they intentionally escalate the biochemical aggression. Another student interjected. And then consume them socially? Apparently with great enthusiasm, Ethra said, often while being recorded. The Rithari frowned. Why? Ethra didn't have a good answer. Over in the Behavioral Bio-Culinary Research Wing, established just 5 years prior to explore edible materials across species, there was now an entire corner reallocated to what had been hastily labeled the Terran Spice Dossier. Dr. Verm, a cultural ingestion analyst, leaned over a containment bench, staring at a drop of hot sauce suspended in a gel bubble. It was labeled Blazin' Regret, Batch #2. He turned to Josh, who sat nearby, still recovering but now cleared to roam. I've tried parsing the logic behind it, Verm said. The agony-to-reward ratio defies known pleasure-response mechanisms. Josh rubbed his jaw. I mean, yeah, it hurts. But it's not just the pain, it's the thrill, the endorphins, the accomplishment. Spice challenges are a rite of passage. And it's weirdly communal. You suffer together, you bond. Dr. Verm jotted something in his notes. So communal trauma, but edible. Kind of. The analyst made a long, slow whistle through his spiracles. Your species might need counseling. We probably do, Josh said, sipping carefully from a chilled nutrient shake. But you're missing the other side of it. Some folks just really like the taste. There's depth and heat, you know? It's not just fire, it's flavor complexity, like fermented chilies, or smoky notes in habanero blends. That led to a 20-minute digression on salsas, curries, and global pepper diversity. By the end of it, Dr. Verm looked overwhelmed. This is not a culinary tradition. This is biological brinkmanship. Back in the dorms, Josh's notoriety had reached a point where other exchange students were now cautiously attempting their own versions of the challenge. The Institute issued a formal memo. Notice, all interactions with Terran foodstuffs classified above Scoville 500 are to be supervised by medical staff or faculty with cross-species ingestion clearance. The Institute is not responsible for hallucinogenic visions, cardiovascular trauma, or perceived ancestral contact. Naturally, it was ignored within hours. In the common room, 2 Kashari students sat cross-legged in front of a miniature dish containing a dot of diluted hot sauce, a 1 to 1,000 solution of ghost pepper oil suspended in flavor-neutral gelatin. The first one, Yil, tapped her tongue to it. She shuddered violently, then slumped over, eyes wide. I saw stars folding into themselves, she whispered. I tasted geometry. The second student, less brave, declined to try. I don't want to taste math. Josh, watching from across the room, gave them a thumbs up of solidarity. Respect. Microdosing's the way to go. Meanwhile, Ethra began receiving messages from colleagues across the Galactic Institute network. One from Professor Hredak of the Neurochemical Sensory Department read, "Is it true you allowed a human to ingest a Class 3 biohazard during lecture?" Ethra's reply was terse. Allowed is a strong word. Another came from Archivist Nell. "We've had to create a new hazard icon, red triangle, flame. Caption reads, spicy to Terrans, fatal to others. Congratulations." Ethra simply sighed and stared out the window. In his office, the containment tray from the ill-fated lecture now rested under double stasis. 5 specimens remained. One empty slot glared back at him like an accusation. He tapped his desk console and brought up a new lecture module. Terran neurogastrobiology, adaptation or addiction. Part of him wanted to label it satire, but the board had already issued approval for a special topic series. 3 days later, the lecture hall was packed. Students from unrelated departments filled the seats. Even non-biological majors were present. Word had spread. The event was titled Terran Pain Consumption, an Exploration into Culinary Suffering. Josh, seated on the stage not as a patient this time, but as a guest speaker, wore a black t-shirt with a chili pepper insignia and the phrase "I survived, searing death bloom." Ethra opened the session, speaking through gritted teeth. Today, our human guest will explain why substances that cause blistering, cardiac stress, and digestive hemorrhaging are considered snacks. Josh took the podium. Okay, so first of all, not all of us are this crazy, but enough of us are that this counts as a global phenomenon. He pulled up images on the holo display clips from Earth of Hot Wing contests, the Death Chip Challenge, and a grandmother casually cooking with Scotch bonnets. The students gasped, murmured, and in one case, shrieked. A Grolin in the back raised his arm. "So you choose to suffer together for bonding?" "Yeah, exactly. It's like shared trauma, but tasty, kind of." Another asked, "Do the winners receive anything?" "Mostly pride, and stomach cramps, sometimes a t-shirt." Ethra rubbed his temples. Josh finished with a photo of a small Earth family, father, mother, and child, all grinning over a backyard grill. On the table were rows of sauces, each labeled with heat levels from mild to pure evil. "They look happy," one student said. Josh smiled. "They probably are. That's Sunday afternoon for us." After the session, students lingered. Some asked for recipes. A few requested a guided tasting, supervised, of course. Ethra made a note to coordinate with the med bay. By the week's end, the Institute issued new training for staff in response to emerging Terran ingestion risk culture. Josh was back to regular food, but avoided anything spicy for now. His taste buds hadn't quite forgiven him. As he walked into the cafeteria, he noticed a new addition to the display above the food dispensers. Spice level, Terran compliant, consume at own risk. Next to it, a red triangle with a flame. He smiled and grabbed a tray. Behind the counter, the newly curious kitchen staff had prepared something just for him, an Inferno Cube 2, this time balanced with yogurt and herbs from the Andrellan Moon Gardens. It steamed gently. He took a bite. He didn't cry. Much. By mid-cycle, Josh couldn't walk 10 meters without someone stopping him. "Is it true you once drank pure capsaicin concentrate?" "No. That would actually kill me." "Did you hallucinate the ghost of your ancestors?" "Nope, just had heartburn and regrets." "Would you autograph my heat-proof spoon?" That one, he did. The cafeteria had converted one corner into a Terran tolerance test bar, supervised by a rotating med assistant and ringed with posters warning, "Do not attempt without clearance." Each dish came with a 5-tier spice scale. Students lined up daily, drawn by the thrill, the mystery, and the ever-present possibility of a mild medical emergency. Josh, now unofficially dubbed the Pepper Prophet by half the campus, had been pulled into everything from panel discussions to taste tests. One department asked him to consult on a cross-species culinary diplomacy initiative. Another wanted to know if Earth-based spice could be used in non-lethal defense tech. He turned that one down. No one should be maced by a burrito. Meanwhile, Professor Ethra sat in his office, nursing what might have been the first documented academic migraine caused by salsa. His lecture revisions were complete, his field notes updated, his pride battered but recovering. Most of all, he was tired of surprise. That changed when he received a discreet alert one morning. Subject: Unscheduled greenhouse activity. Section 8D, Restricted flora. He blinked. Section 8D was where the Institute stored specimens of theoretical cultural significance. Basically, the shelf for weird Terran plants deemed too confusing to classify. He walked down the corridor, past sealed doors and decontamination gates, until he reached the greenhouse. Inside, glowing softly under UV mimicking light, were 3 small sprouting chili plants. Someone had planted more. His badge got him through the access lock. The air smelled faintly of damp soil and optimism. A datapad sat on the workstation. It was Josh's. Ethra scrolled through the notes. Attempting cultivation of milder chili variants to share with other species. Goal: introduce heat in tolerable doses. Working title: flavor without fire. Too much. Note to self: do not use habanero again. Rest in peace. Tasting volunteer. There was a photo attached, an alien student curled in a blanket, staring into space, captioned, "He said he saw the universe open like a fruit." Ethra sat down, baffled all over again. Josh appeared a few minutes later, wearing gardening gloves and a hopeful look. "Professor." "Student Joshua." They stared at the plants for a moment. Josh picked up a small watering sprayer and tended to the soil gently. "I figured," he said, "maybe we could work on something less terrifying. A bridge, not a dare. Something that tastes good without causing emotional collapse." Ethra tilted his head. "A noble instinct. But you understand, these plants are still potentially hazardous. Not if we control the hybrids, crossbreed them with low Scoville variants, monitor capsaicin levels. I even got clearance from the Behavioral Culinary Board." Ethra took a long breath. "And your goal?" Josh looked at the tiny peppers beginning to form. "To share flavor, real flavor. The stuff we grew up on, just safe. Sort of. Safer. Terrans eat for connection. It's not just fuel. It's emotion, family, ritual, culture. Maybe if we do it right, it won't just be a story about how weird we are. Maybe we can show them why we do it." Ethra studied him for a long time. Then, finally, he nodded. "Very well, but I oversee all trials, and no open consumption within 10 meters of a non-Terran without clearance. Deal." That afternoon, a new sign appeared above the test garden. Joint Project. Capsicum Integration Initiative. Terran-affiliated botanical outreach. The first open tasting event happened 1 week later. The dish was mild, a simple stew, Earth-style, using a newly bred pepper variant named Harmony Red. It was rich, warm, and contained just enough capsaicin to register barely a whisper of heat. For most of the alien attendees, it was still the spiciest thing they'd ever eaten. And for some, it changed everything. One Zarathi student blinked rapidly as she swallowed her first bite. "It's like music, but in my mouth." Another sniffled and said, "My tongue is confused and delighted." The Grolin, formerly the most spice-fearing creature on campus, ate half a bowl and declared, "This is pain I can respect." By the end of the week, 3 alien culinary clubs had formed, 2 for slow integration, 1 for advanced experimentation. The third group promptly hospitalized a member with a raw slice of jalapeno and was put on a 2-week suspension. Josh became a mentor figure not for eating absurdly spicy things, but for showing restraint. He taught them how to start with sweet peppers, how to use dairy-based extinguishers, and how to recognize the never again face. It wasn't fame anymore. It was something better. And for Ethra, it brought clarity. He added a final section to his Terran Flora lecture series. Module 7.4, Culinary Biohazards and the Intersection of Culture and Chemistry. Not all pain is injury. In rare cases, it is ritual, bonding, and flavor. Terrans do not fear heat. They curate it, respect it, and occasionally suffer for it, enthusiastically. At the bottom of the slide, he added a symbol, a small, stylized red chili, haloed in gold. He closed his lecture notes and stood to leave. On his door was a hand-drawn flyer. Inferno Night, Terran Buffet, sponsored by the Culinary Outreach Club. All species welcome. Waivers required. He stared at it, then smiled. Not because he understood it, but because he no longer needed to. Across the campus, in a little greenhouse warmed by artificial earth sun, tiny red fruits ripened slowly on their vines. Students filed past them daily, curious, cautious, eager. Flavor was spreading, not like wildfire, but like roots.